Welcome to Taking Care of Business on News Talk 1180 KERN for the best in Saturday talk radio at 1 o'clock, and on 1230 KGEO at 10 o'clock Saturday, and for the best in Wednesday talk radio on 1410 KERI, the Christian station. We're now on 1000 KKIM in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and also on the internet on knookmedium.com, serving Richmond, Oakland, and the San Francisco Bay Area. Your host is Clay Koerner, and I'm Marty Pay, and our producer is Greg Held. Hey, Clay, what a great way to start out the year with the kind of show we're going to have today.
Always interesting show.
Yeah, especially this one. On November 22nd, 1963, three famous men died: John F. Kennedy, C.S. Lewis, and Alexis Huxley. Our guest in the second half, Peter Kreeft, famous author, wrote a book entitled Between Heaven and Hell. The book starts out with the three men meeting in the clouds and discussing what next, what happens now. But right now we are very, very fortunate to interview a gentleman who's been on my short list of people I've always wanted to interview. The man who I have the utmost respect and admiration for, a man who was willing to give his life for the President and Mrs. Kennedy that faithful day in Dallas 50 years ago. Author, Secret Service agent, Clint Hill. Clint, welcome to Taking Care of Business.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
I just finished your book, 5 Days in November. What a great book that was, and I can't wait to start the book you wrote on Mrs. Kennedy.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope you find it informative and full of valuable information.
Well, and the second book is called Mrs. Kennedy and Me.
That's correct.
Because you were the head of Mrs. Kennedy's detail for a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I was assigned to her right after the election in 1960, and I remained with her for 1 year after the assassination until November of 1964.
At which time you went back and actually went to work for President Johnson, right?
Yeah, I went back to the White House detail, and President Johnson was in office at the time, so I was assigned to President Johnson.
Uh-huh. Tell us about the books and why write them now 50 years later?
Well, I had vowed that I would never write a book. I never wanted to, and I had every opportunity to because I'd been approached numerous times. An agent friend of mine decided to write a book. He had left the Secret Service in 1964, shortly after the assassination, and went into a security business. But when he finally retired, he just wanted to set the record straight, so to speak, about what the Kennedy detail, those agents who were assigned to President Kennedy, were like and what they went through and what it was like to work in that administration. And so he collaborated with a young lady named Lisa McCubbin to write that book. But Mr. Blaine, who was the author, was not in Dallas at the time of the assassination. He was over in Austin, Texas, setting it up for the president's arrival there that night. And they needed to talk to somebody who had been in Dallas, and I was the logical person, and so they came to me. I at first said I didn't want any part of it, but after they made some concessions to me, I agreed that I would assist them. And in that process, it became very cathartic for me to reveal what actually happened in Dallas and talk about it, because I had never talked about it since the time that it happened, except to the Warren Commission and a brief interview on 60 Minutes in 1975. Other than that, I had not discussed it with my family, my friends, or even my fellow agents. And so when I began to talk to Ms. McCubbin about it, it was like a weight was lifted off my shoulders, like I was removing some emotional baggage that had been buried deep within me, and it was really, really cathartic for me to do so. And so then they talked me into writing a book called Mrs. Kennedy and Me, about my time with Mrs. Kennedy. And that was especially cathartic because it was the good times and the bad times. And then they came to me in 2012, late 2012, and thought it would be a good idea to write a book about just the trip to Texas, what happened, and what followed regarding the funeral and the arrangements in Washington. And so I finally agreed to do that, and that turned out to be the book 5 Days in November. And so that's really the history of my kind of writing these books.
We're having an interview with Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who was there that fateful day 50 years ago in Dallas.
Clint, I watched that 60-minute interview. That was quite interesting. It was a pretty emotional interview for you. It looked like it was a coming out, sort of getting things off your shoulder and being able to release some of the stress that you've had over the years. Would that be correct?
Well, it was somewhat of the release, but it was also because I broke on camera. I mean, if you saw it, you know exactly what happened.
Right.
And after that, I had retired just before that interview occurred, and I really went into a deeper depression afterwards that lasted for a period of about 7 years until 1982. And so, although Mike Wallace was very kind and very concerned about me, he used to call me about once a week to make sure I was okay, because he knew what I had gone through. And even so, I really went into a deep depression, and it was very difficult for a period of about 7 years.
Well, you know, Clint, it's interesting looking at that 60-minute interview and then watching an interview you had done with Brian Lamb this year, and just looking at the contrast between the two. It seemed like you were still holding yourself responsible for what happened in 1975, where this year it seems you seem to be more at peace with the events as far as what happened.
Well, that's true. I have always felt a sense of responsibility in that we had the job to protect the President of the United States. And on November 22nd, 1963, we failed. We were unable to do that. And so that has eaten at me terribly ever since, because the way I was brought up, when you're given a job to do, you do it to the end result, and you never stop until it's over. And unfortunately, in this particular case, we were unable to complete our mission. And so that has really bothered me. It still bothers me today, but not nearly as bad as it used to.
Well, you're talking a matter of seconds or partial seconds in the ability to protect the president and keep him from getting shot at that time, weren't you?
Oh, absolutely. Things like that happen so quickly. Events unfold so rapidly that it's very difficult to comprehend how fast it really is happening, and it's very difficult to do anything to prevent it.
I think one of the comments you made in one of your interviews was, basically, if you'd have turned left instead of right, you'd have been shot rather than the Kennedy.
Well, that was how I felt originally when I did that 60 Minutes interview. But I realize now, after I went back to Dallas in 1990 and looked at everything, I came away with the conclusion that I had done everything I could that day. There wasn't much more I could have done. So I know I'm not faster than a speeding bullet, so I really didn't have a chance to get there in time to intercede, to place myself between that third bullet and the president.
So as far as you know, there were only 3 bullets fired, and they were all fired from the same place?
Absolutely. There were only 3 shots fired that day at Dealey Plaza, and they all came from the same location, a 6th-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository.
You know, one thing, Clint, that you just touched on was going back to Dallas in 1990. Tell us a little bit about that. That was the first time you had been to the assassination site in, 27 years since it happened?
That's correct, yes.
What was that experience
like?
like?
It took me 27 years to get back there. I should have done it in 1964. I would have been much better off if I would have confronted the situation then. But I didn't. And so when I did go back in 1990, I went back there with the intent of finding out as much information as I could about the location and everything about it that I could, and I did do that. And that was very beneficial to me emotionally, because I realized then that all the advantages had gone to the shooter. We didn't have any, and there wasn't much more I could have done.
You know, it's interesting. I was in the Marines. I was a sharpshooter in the Marines, and I've never been to that site. But what people tell me is it's a lot smaller than people think. The range was about 80 yards. That's about the distance he had to shoot from. That doesn't sound like it would be that difficult of a shot to take, you know, especially straight on like that.
It wasn't difficult at all, and it was a lot smaller, as you said, than most people believe. And he was directly behind us. He didn't have to move the rifle left or right. All he had to do is raise it slightly as we moved away from him very slowly, and caught us from the back. And that's what happened.
Yeah, that would be a pretty easy shot to take, unfortunately. So
yeah, it was, and it was an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, and I think, just that Zapruder film, watching you running to the back of that car and the experience you had as far as, trying to shelter Mrs. Kennedy. She was on the trunk trying to pull back part of her husband's brain. I mean, that has to be a traumatic experience for you. Obviously, it's traumatic for people that watched it. I was 13 at the time of the assassination, and it still, sticks in my mind. So it's just incredible what you had to go through that day and succeeding years after that. When we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit about Mrs. Kennedy and you.
Very good.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Koerner Radio, News Talk 1180.